Hello and welcome to HyperMove. In this video, we'll get you acquainted with the interface and workflow of HyperMove. So to start out, we have the 3D real-time view. And below that, you have selection modes. And then you have tools such as moving and scaling. Then there's some easy navigation tools that you can switch between environments, models, cameras, and you can also play back your animations. Then you have some camera modes, and then output options. Now you also have your modes here, so if you switch between these, you'll see you have models, materials, scene, and within each mode you have a thumbnail viewer, and then the properties and tools. So let's bring in a model. Let's just click Control-I, select a model, click Open, and depending on the format of your model, you'll get different import settings. For an OBJ, I get the choice of material or group for my geometry groupings, and I'll just click OK. That brings in your model, and you can just select it by left-clicking on it in Models mode. Clicking Auto Size will scale it a bit, and center it and floor your model. Now you can then move your model by going to Move Objects, selecting your model, and then you can just drag the widget to move that. You can also rotate by taking the widget and just rotating. Holding Shift will constrain it, and not holding Shift will allow you to go to any degree. Hitting Reset will bring it back to where it was by default. You can use the Scale tool to change the size of your model, and you can stretch it out using one of the outer bars or using the center to do a proportional scale. Again, Reset will bring it back to normal. Now in parts mode, you have a thumbnail for each part. If you double click the thumbnail, it'll select that part in the real-time view. And you can select your parts here as well just by left clicking. In joints, you have the ability to create a joint, which is a group of parts that can be moved separately from the rest of the model. To do this, go to parts mode, select a couple using Control to select multiple, and then click New Child Joint. Now you have a new joint that you can move separately. So if we just center the pivot point to bring the pivot point down into the center, we can then move our joint. And then I can just hit Control-Z to get it back to normal. Next you have Materials mode. And in Materials mode, you can open up the default material library. And you can browse through this and drag and drop materials onto your model. And I'll just take a couple to get us started. Okay, so when I dragged and dropped them, they were applied into my project library, and if I select these, I can see the properties and tool for each one specifically. So first of all, I have a metal. With metal, I get metal-specific properties. With paint, I get paint-specific properties, and with metallic paint, I get metallic paint-specific properties. I could still drag and drop these onto other parts in the scene. And then I can go in here and modify the properties. So, for example, metallic paint, you get a base coat, which you can adjust. And then you also have a metal coat. So, if you want the metal to shine as a different color, then you can set it to a different color. Or you can just make it look subtle. And then you also over here in properties have settings such as the ratio of metal to base coat or the metal roughness, and each material has its own properties. Now if you want to get into texturing, we'll just apply this textured material over to these other surfaces, and you'll see that by default it's tiled not quite the way we want it. So let's select our material here and click Add Edit Texture. Now you can adjust the tiling of your material just by typing in a new tiling here or using the slider. If we use 1 and 1, that makes it a bit better. But right now we're seeing that the mapping from the 3D modeling software isn't quite what we want. So if you select a part, and you'll notice we're right now in part selection mode, you can then change the mapping for that part. So let's try a box map. And you'll see when you apply a box map, you get this visual box representing your mapping, as compared to a spherical map, which gives you a sphere, and a cylindrical map gives you a cylinder. So we'll just put a box map. And I'm going to apply that box map to a couple of these different parts. And now we can use our tiling to adjust the size of the texture overall. So if we just put in, let's say 10 and 10, that starts to look pretty nice. Now I can use texture modulate to blend the texture with the underlying material. So if I wanted to give this a bit of a color, it's easy to do. You can also bring in a bump map by double clicking and navigating to a bump map and just open that up. Now I want to lock the tiling on the color map so that it matches the tiling on the bump map. Now it'll convert a standard JPEG to a normal map, which is usable as a bump map automatically. If I turn up the bump scale, then I can get more detail. Or we'll just turn that down a bit, or just somewhere in between. The next mode you have is decals, where you can create sticker-like decals. Right-click, new decal, and then select a graphic. Then just drag and drop it onto your model. And then you can use your right mouse button to scale that down. And you can use brightness as alpha to get rid of black. It'll interpret black as transparent. Then you can use stencil only to apply a material to your decal. So if we just put this material on there, it now takes on the properties of that material. You could try that with a textured material as well, or this red. If you want to map this onto different parts, you can go here, enlarge your decal, and you'll see by default it only goes onto one part at a time. But if you click multiple part decal, then it'll go onto several different parts. Now down here in scene, you have the ability to control the lighting in your scene. So you have environment, and you can switch between these different environments. You also have background plates, which are photographs that go behind your object, and then you use your camera tools to position your object within the background plate. You have foreground plates that can serve as photographs that go in front of your object, so that could be like a magazine layout that has a transparency so you can see through parts of the image. And props are just 3D objects that are tied to your scene. Lights, if we just select our light here, we can rotate it around. And you can also change that from a directional to a point. And I'll just bring that in a bit closer. And you see with a directional light, my shadow gets larger as it's projected. And just bring down the intensity. You can also use a spotlight, which has a cone to control the focus of the light, which you can increase the size of. And there's all sorts of other properties to get the kind of light you want. Down here in camera, you can create new cameras, and you can see different views from different angles. And then animations is where you can make your model move. So if we just go model selection mode and move objects, right click and hit add keyframe. Open up our animation timeline, and this is going to be just very basic, but if you want to learn more about animating, then just watch the animation tutorials. But basically, we just move our current time marker and then move our object, and that's going to automatically keyframe your object. And then we can play that back to see what effect we get. And the last mode is images. So in images, it's going to show you your previously rendered out images. So this leads us into output. With ray trace, you can actually ray trace your object, which is like the render that Hypershot uses. So if you have transparent materials and a lot of reflections, then ray trace is the most accurate way to go. And it could look something like this with accurate refractions. If you don't have any of that, then a smart thing to do would just do snapshot, because it's faster and uses your graphics card, but it's not quite as accurate. But it still gets pretty good quality, such as this image. And we can compare this image to the ray traced version to see the difference there is. And then the last option is to launch the entire scene into Hypershot, where you can then use Hypershot to further fine-tune the lighting and materials and then render out with Hypershot.